Hey guys, tonight we step barefoot across a cold stone threshold, the scent of beeswax and old wool rising around us. You're standing inside a medieval solar, a private upstairs chamber, dimly lit by tallow candles, their smoky flames twitching as the door creaks closed behind you. The wooden bed frame looms dressed in clean rushes and creaky linen. Your fingers tremble as you unfasten your girdle, stiff from the weight of your new woolen gown. Somewhere downstairs, the feast still thunders laughter, the distant plunk of a lute, the clinking of cups you didn't get to raise. You've just been married, and now it's time for your wedding night. If you're lucky, you're 15. If not, you're 12 or even younger. You probably haven't spoken more than 5 words to the man you're supposed to spend your life with. Your body might not even be ready for what's about to happen. But nobody asked you. Nobody waited. And frankly, nobody cares. So before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. I'd love to know where you're listening from. Drop your location and local time in the comments. Now dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. The door clicks shut, and you're alone with him. Not in a romantic way, not in a hearts and eyes way, in a cold, transactional, awkward way that makes your stomach twist. Your new husband might be twice your age. He might smell like garlic and ale. He might be just as afraid as you are, but you wouldn't know. You're not supposed to talk about it. You're supposed to submit. Historically, the wedding night wasn't the start of something joyful for many women. It was the beginning of an obligation, an expectation. A lifelong series of performances with real stakes. Bear children, prove your worth, survive. You can't ask questions. Your mother didn't tell you anything either because she didn't know or because she thought ignorance was safer. Some girls whispered rumors behind bakehouse walls, but those stories were half joke, half horror. Outside your shuttered window, the moon is climbing. Somewhere a dog barks. You wonder if your father is already asleep, if your dowry chest has been moved into your husband's solar yet. That chest is now part of his household, and so are you. The fear doesn't come from the darkness. It comes from not knowing where the boundaries are. Are you allowed to say no? Are you supposed to cry? What if it hurts? What if it bleeds? The weirdest part, this is considered a good outcome. If you'd been a peasant girl, you might have been married off before your first period. If you were noble, your match was likely sealed when you were a toddler. Some girls were betrothed in the cradle, political pawns, dressed in embroidered linen, bartered like fine sheep. Historians still argue whether women had any say in these arrangements. A few records show brides resisting or even fleeing, but those are rare and usually punished. More often, you were walked down an aisle in silence, maybe with a stiff smile and a stomach full of dread. Let's be honest. You probably won't survive this wedding night with your dignity intact. Because dignity in this world isn't yours to keep. It's something others grant you based on whether you're obedient, fertile, and quiet. If you're lucky, your new husband will simply get drunk and fall asleep. That's the dream scenario. If you're unlucky, well, let's not dwell too hard. Just know that many women came away from their wedding nights bruised, confused, and terrified. One noblewoman in the 14th century reportedly screamed so loudly that her maids heard her from 3 rooms away. Her mother-in-law told them to ignore it. It was just nerves. Meanwhile, the church was busy scribbling endless rules about what counted as appropriate intimacy and when. Spoiler alert, Sundays were off limits, so were feast days, Lent, Advent, and a long list of other holy times, which didn't leave much room for consent, did it? That flickering candle beside you. It's meant to stay lit all night. Not for romance, for witnessing. In some communities, marriage consummation had to be confirmed by third parties. We're talking servants, priests, even family members lurking behind curtains or peeking through cracks. It's not just mortifying, it's institutionalized trauma, and yet no one talks about it. Instead, stories of chivalry and courtly love fill the pages. But the reality was this love rarely came first, if it came at all. For most women, the wedding night wasn't the beginning of a fairy tale. It was the first page of a contract, one they couldn't read, couldn't question, and couldn't escape. You lie down stiff on the straw mattress, the wooden beams above you groaning like a warning. The shadows dance. You close your eyes, but your heart is hammering. Outside, someone starts singing a drunken verse of a wedding ballad that feels more like a dirge. And just like that, your childhood ends. You don't remember the moment your marriage was arranged, because you were probably still teething. Maybe it happened over ale and stew, two fathers grunting through negotiations, while you played with a bit of string on the floor. Or maybe it was inked into a scroll sealed in wax and carried off by a courier before you'd ever said your first full sentence. Either way, you weren't in the room. You didn't get a vote. In the Middle Ages, marriage wasn't a romantic union. It was a social and economic transaction. Your body was the small print. Your feelings weren't even on the page. As a girl, your worth lay entirely in your future, fertility, your father's land holdings, and the strategic advantage of your womb. If you were a noble, your family's status hinged on whom you could marry and whom your children could inherit from. If you were a peasant, marriage was more about labor and survival. Who could help carry the firewood? Who'd work the mill together? In either case, the contracts were drawn up early. Child marriages were incredibly common. Some were ceremonial, symbolic unions until both parties hit puberty. But others, very real, very binding, and very unkind. You, for instance, were probably promised to your new husband years ago, long before your hands stopped smelling like barley porridge. By the time the betrothal was formalized, maybe you'd grown old enough to understand what was coming, but not old enough to run. The church technically required both parties to consent to marriage. But surprise, that rule was laughably easy to bypass. If your father said yes loudly enough, your silence was interpreted as agreement. Historians still argue whether this was willful ignorance or just cultural steamrolling. But either way, it left young girls stuck in silk dresses far too early. And let's talk about age gaps. You're 12. Your groom maybe 30, maybe 40, sometimes 50. If you were marrying a widower, and many women did, he'd already buried a wife or two along with several children. You're not joining a romance. You're filling a vacancy. Even when both bride and groom were young, the power imbalance was vast. He was raised to inherit lead and control. You were raised to obey, submit, and hopefully not die in childbirth. Your education stopped at embroidery and catechism. His included law, weaponry, and land management. Your role in this grand arrangement, barely above livestock. In fact, a good milk cow could fetch more on the open market than a bride with a small dowry. Still, society dressed it up nicely. Union of souls, they called it. Or divine pairing. But beneath all the lace and Latin, this was business. You were transferred like property locked into place by tradition church law. and about a dozen witnesses eager to get to the feasting. And you know what's extra unsettling? People celebrated this. The younger the bride, the more virile the husband, the more noise everyone made about how lucky you were. Some guests would pat you on the head and chuckle about how you'll be a mother by next spring. Your mother might cry, but only in private, and only once. Meanwhile, the legal systems didn't exactly offer you a safety net. In some areas, the age of consent was as low as 12 or even 7, as long as the marriage wasn't consummated right away. But let's not pretend those boundaries were respected. The law said one thing. Custom, opportunity, and silence said something else entirely. And what if you were not from the landed classes? Same story, different tools. Among peasants, marriage often wasn't written down. It was a verbal agreement sealed with bread and beer. Sometimes you shared a blanket long before any priest got involved. But even then, the power imbalance loomed. Women were expected to bear children, manage the household, and serve their husbands without complaint, without support, and often without any education beyond how to milk a goat. There's a quirky little fact that doesn't often make it into textbooks. Some medieval parents paid astrologers to determine the best date for their daughter's wedding night. Planetary alignment, moon phases, even the color of the bride's urine might be considered. Not that it helped. Mercury being in retrograde won't change the reality of a girl facing a stranger in bed. You feel the weight of this centuries-old machine settling on your shoulders. Your breath catches as you remember the moment your father handed you over at the altar. Not lovingly, not emotionally, just formally. Like he was passing along a debt. Outside, the sun has long since set. In the hearth, the fire hisses low. Your husband hasn't said much. Maybe he's tired. Maybe he's polite. Or maybe he just expects you to be ready when he is. And you lie there stiff as a page, wondering what your life would have looked like if you'd been born a boy. Maybe you'd be drinking with the groomsmen, boasting about your hunting dogs, or riding off at dawn to survey your new lands. Instead, you're here wrapped in heavy wool, waiting for something you don't want to understand. That's the curse of the medieval bride. You've been promised, bartered, and bound. And now the price of your obedience comes due one long night at a time. You remember the chest more than the ceremony. Wide carved oak, polished until the wood shone like wet bark. Iron hinges squeaked as they opened it for display, just a peek at your dowry, your contribution to the marriage. Embroidered linens, a silver bowl, 2 combs, and a rosary that wasn't even yours, but your aunt's, passed down like a reminder of all the women traded away before you. Dowries were supposed to be gifts, support for the new couple. But for you and for every medieval bride, they were something closer to a ransom. Your dowry was the price your family paid to offload you. And make no mistake, it was a price. If you were a noblewoman, your dowry might include acres of land, or a tower on the border of someone else's kingdom. If you were lower born, it might be measured in bolts of homespun cloth or cows. But always, it was calculated carefully, precisely, like goods being tallied at market. And here's the twist. Once your dowry passed into your husband's hands, it wasn't really yours anymore. He controlled it. Legally, financially, permanently. You couldn't buy back a piece of bread with it if you were starving. Historians still argue whether the dowry protected women or trapped them. Some say it offered leverage, gave the bride a stake in the marriage. Others say it was just another form of barter, cloaked in religious blessing and legal parchment. You sit on the edge of the bed staring at that chest. You'd thought maybe it would hold your keepsakes, your mother's blue veil, the embroidered rabbit you stitched as a girl. Instead, it holds expectations, proof of value, and leverage his leverage. If things go badly between you and your husband, he can hold that dowry hostage. Refuse to return it if you leave. Demand more from your family if he feels shortchanged. In some cases, men sued for the return of a bride's dowry if she died too early or didn't produce children fast enough. You're not just a wife. You're a financial risk with a face. And then there's the morning gift, a strange medieval tradition where the groom offers something to the bride after the wedding night. A plot of land, a piece of jewelry, a token of satisfaction. Supposedly it was meant to sweeten the deal, but mostly it was a performance. You pretend gratitude, he pretends generosity. Funny how your gifts always come wrapped in strings. At dinner earlier, you remember the way people looked at your dowry chest. Not at you, not at your dress or your hair, just at the chest. That was the real bride. You were just the ribbon. Peasant women didn't always have formal dowries, but even then, the logic was the same. A new wife was expected to arrive with something: skills, savings, supplies. Maybe your parents scraped together a goat, a comb, and a sack of barley. Maybe not. Either way, your usefulness had to be visible, and God help the girl without one. In towns and cities, a whole industry grew around matchmaking and dowry negotiation. There were even dowry funds for poor girls, especially orphans. On the surface, this seems charitable, but it wasn't about love or freedom. It was about making girls more marriageable, more tradable. One quirky record from 13th century Italy tells of a girl who received her dowry from a local guild as long as she agreed to marry someone from that guild within 6 months. That's not a gift. That's a deadline. You shift your weight on the bed. The wooden frame creaks. Your husband is still downstairs, maybe getting another refill, maybe boasting to his cousins about how well the deal turned out. You're tired, but your mind races. What if you had refused the marriage? What if you'd run? In some rare cases, women did. A girl in 14th century France disguised herself as a boy and joined a merchant caravan to escape an arranged match. She made it to Spain before anyone caught her. What happened after, no one knows. Probably not a happy ending. Because refusing marriage wasn't just rebellion, it was ruin. You could be disowned, excommunicated, labeled as unruly, which was basically social death. No home, no protection, and nowhere to go except maybe a convent, if you were lucky, and your family hadn't already donated all your options away, so you didn't refuse. You smiled at the altar. You curtsied to the priest. You sat through hours of feasting and drank sour wine while your husband played dice with his friends. And now you're in this room next to the dowry chest, wondering how something so full could leave you feeling so empty. Outside, the wind picks up. You hear it hiss through the shutters, a low moan like a warning. You reach for a corner of the blanket and pull it around your shoulders. The chest creaks again as it settles its heavy lid like a sealed tomb. That's what a dowry was, really. A promise sealed shut. And once the key is turned, there's no getting out. The music downstairs is starting to fade, but not because the party's over. The guests are tired, bloated from 3 courses of meat, spiced wine, and whatever exotic fish the cook hauled in from the coast. A few are already passed out under benches. But you're still wide awake because this isn't over for you. You've just lived through your first medieval wedding feast, and while everyone else will go home with sore stomachs and drunken smiles, you're walking straight into something you've been dreading all evening. But let's rewind for a moment. Earlier today, you were paraded through the village in your stiffest dress hair, braided in ways that pulled so tight, your scalp throbbed. You smelled like rosewater and stress. The church bells clanged. Your hands were ice. Everyone was watching, because weddings in the Middle Ages were community events, especially in villages. Your body may have belonged to your new husband now, but your appearance still belonged to the crowd. Every glance judged your age, your beauty, your composure. Some people cheered. Others whispered. Someone probably made a bet on whether you'd cry. And once you made it through the vows, spoken clearly, so there'd be no doubts later, the feast began. Roasted boar pigeon pie, barley stews, honey cakes, nuts. The food smelled incredible, but you couldn't eat. Not really. Not when every eye turned to you whenever the lute paused. You forced smiles. You drank a bit of weak ale. And all the while your stomach turned not from the food, but from the knowledge of what came next. Because medieval wedding feasts weren't just parties. They were pressure cookers. Everyone there knew what was expected. Not just of your marriage, but of you tonight. The jokes started early. Dirty songs about love and duty. Men nudging your husband. Older women giving you that awful, pitying smile. And when the dancers started up, you wished the music would never stop. Because dancing meant celebration. Celebration meant closure. And closure meant the ceremony that was coming. The bedding. Now there were variations depending on class and region. But one thing was common across Europe. Newlyweds weren't usually left alone. Nope, that would be too private. Instead, your community, your friends, family, neighbors, and servants literally escorted you to bed. And they didn't just walk you there like polite chauffeurs. They sang, they cheered, they shoved you. One bride in 15th century England reportedly had her dress ripped by rowdy groomsmen eager to get the party to the good part. Some guests even stayed in the room while you were undressed, or waited just outside the curtain to hear confirmation. Historians still argue how widespread this was, whether it was mostly nobles or rural folk who practiced such ceremonies. But even in more subdued cases, there was pressure to prove the deed had been done. The next morning, there might be bloodied sheets hung from the window or displayed in the courtyard. Yes, literally. Like some grotesque laundry announcement that said, "Congrats, we did it." And if there wasn't any blood, well, now you're in trouble. You shift under the covers trying to forget the chorus of drunk voices singing bawdy rhymes just a few hours ago. Someone handed your husband a goblet with a wink. Someone else toasted to many strong sons. Meanwhile, you were seated next to your mother-in-law, who spent half the feast scanning you like a prize cow at a fair. Because the bedding wasn't just about ritual, it was about power. It reminded everyone, especially you, that your body now served a purpose bigger than yourself. A legal, biological, and social function. There was no escape hatch. And what if you had stumbled during the feast, looked too nervous, refused the bedding party? Some brides who resisted were labeled difficult, or worse, suspect. One noble family had their daughter physically restrained and carried to her wedding bed for her own good. Let that sink in. And that silence, that fear you feel now. It's not just yours, it's collective. Thousands of women before you have laid in beds like this, stomachs in knots, staring at the ceiling and wondering how they got here. Here's a quirky fact to lighten the mood. Barely in parts of Scandinavia, it was considered bad luck to let the bride and groom reach the bedroom on their own, so guests would form a human bridge with their arms for the couple to crawl through. Sweet right, except it ended with the groom tossing the bride on the bed like a sack of onions. Cute traditions. Back in your room, the fire's burned low. A single candle flickers in its holder. The sounds of the feast are distant now, just the occasional burst of laughter or the thud of boots on stairs. You try not to breathe too loudly. Your husband is here. He doesn't say much. Maybe he's just as overwhelmed. Maybe he's half drunk and half scared. Maybe he thinks this is supposed to be romantic. But either way, neither of you knows what you're doing. Because nobody ever teaches you how to begin a life like this, just how to obey it. And that's why, even after the roast pig and the wine-soaked dancing, the wedding feast wasn't the fun part. It was the warning. The pageantry before the plunge. Because tonight wasn't a celebration of love. It was a ceremony of surrender. You don't remember how you got here. Only that you're suddenly standing barefoot on cold stone, your dress half loosened, and your cheeks burning as strangers hoot and holler. The door slams behind you. You're in the bedchamber now, alone. Except, you're not really alone, are you? Because just minutes ago, you were paraded into the room like a prize animal. Welcome to the bedding ceremony, the medieval version of the world's worst group project. It starts with shouting, laughter, tazing. Guests singing loud, lewd songs about marital duties. Your husband is pushed toward you with jeers and claps. Someone tries to hand you a goblet of mead to relax you. You smile tightly, because what else can you do? The tradition varies from region to region, century to century. But the core idea remains horrifyingly the same, a public send-off into your first night of forced intimacy. In noble houses, high-ranking guests might escort you to the bed, watch you lie down, and draw the curtains with exaggerated ceremony. In rural villages, it could be louder, rougher men and women jostling around the bed making crude jokes, sometimes even yanking off a shoe or two for good luck. And yes, some of them stayed in the room. Historians still argue whether this was symbolic or literal. Some say it was meant to witness the consummation without actually watching the act. Others say it depended on social status. Peasants got privacy. Nobles got an audience. Either way, the message was clear. This night isn't yours. It belongs to everyone. You glance at the bed. The rushes have been freshly changed. There's a pitcher of wine on the side table. You recognize the blanket. It came from your dowry chest. Even the things that are yours aren't yours anymore. There's a funny little superstition in some parts of Europe. If the marriage wasn't consummated, it didn't count. You could be legally bound by the church publicly married, but if no one believed you sealed the deal physically, your husband could walk away. Or worse, have the marriage annulled and keep your dowry. And guess what that means? You go home disgraced, empty-handed, and unmarried, but definitely not untraumatized. You sit on the edge of the bed, heart hammering. Your husband tries to make small talk. Maybe he's nervous too. Maybe he's pretending not to be. You don't know what to say. You weren't taught what to say. No one ever told you how to do this, only that it had to be done. And you don't even fully understand what has to be done. That's the cruelest twist. Most medieval brides had absolutely no idea what sex was. Not anatomically, not emotionally, not practically. A lot of girls entered their wedding nights knowing only that something will happen. Something painful. Something necessary. something you can't refuse. You're expected to submit, to be grateful, to please. But how? What if it hurts? What if you cry? What if he doesn't care? There's an awkward silence. The candles hiss softly. You can hear voices outside the chamber, still laughing, still lurking. You wonder if someone's leaning against the door, listening for signs. Maybe a servant. Maybe your husband's uncle. Maybe the priest. Because in some regions, it wasn't enough to have the community cheer you into bed. They needed proof afterward. A stained sheet. A shouted confirmation. In France, there were towns where people would literally demand to see the wedding linen the next morning. One 14th century noblewoman reportedly bled on purpose with a pricked finger to avoid suspicion. Another was sent home in disgrace because the sheet remained white. The pressure to perform wasn't just on the groom, it was on you. Because in a culture where virginity was considered a woman's only real virtue, your wedding night was your final exam, and if you failed, your whole life could collapse. There's one bizarre little fringe story from medieval Bohemia. A bride who didn't bleed on her wedding night was locked in a room for 3 days and force-fed bitter herbs to cleanse her shame. Did it help? Of course not. But it gave the community a sense of control. Control! That's what this whole ritual was about. Not love, not intimacy, not connection. Control over your body, your future, your silence. You glance again at your husband. He looks tired, or maybe determined, or maybe just resigned to duty the same as you. This isn't romantic. It's mechanical. Expected and irreversible. He touches your hand. You flinch. He apologizes maybe, or maybe he doesn't notice. You lie down, and suddenly the room feels too small. You try to breathe. In, out. You stare at the rafters overhead. Someone carved initials there once, long before this night. Long before this bed. You wonder if that girl dreaded her night too. You wonder if she got out. Probably not, because for all its songs and sermons, the medieval wedding wasn't a celebration of love. It was a demonstration of ownership, of submission, of ritualized humiliation dressed up in velvet and lace. The candle sputters low. Your limbs feel heavy. The room has gone quiet except for your heartbeat echoing in your ears. And outside the door, silence, but you know they're still out there, waiting, listening, expecting. You lie there barely breathing. The candle flickers, throwing warped shadows across the ceiling beams. Your husband's weight shifts beside you. You clutch the blanket to your chest, heart pounding like it's trying to escape. Because the truth is, you're not just afraid of him. You're afraid of what you don't know. No one prepared you for this. No aunt whispered secrets into your ear. No friend slipped you a helpful tip behind the bakehouse. Your mother kissed your cheek and smoothed your veil, but skipped the terrifying part entirely. And now you're here blindfolded by innocence and pushed off a cliff called marriage. This isn't about attraction or desire. It's a ritual act, an obligation. And you're expected to cooperate even if you don't understand the script. Medieval sex education, if you can even call it that, was a swirling mess of religious guilt, folk superstition, and anatomical ignorance. The church preached that sex was only for procreation. If you enjoyed it, that was suspect. If you asked about it, that was scandalous. If you refused, that was sinful. Women were rarely told what would happen on their wedding night, only that it was their duty. Some were told to lie still. Others were warned it might hurt. But very few were given actual practical knowledge. and so it became a game of tension and silence. One scholar of the period noted that many young wives were so terrified and confused on their first night that they thought they were being punished. Some even cried out in prayer mid-act, believing they'd done something wrong. And maybe that's the worst part. Even when something was wrong, you didn't know how to name it. Your husband, meanwhile, might not know much more than you do. He's been told he must prove himself. He may have heard whispers from squires or older cousins or seen some crude illustrations in a physician's scroll. But real understanding, mutual care. Forget it. This was trial by fire for both of you, but only you bled for it, sometimes literally. Because let's not gloss over this: medieval people didn't fully understand human anatomy. Not yours, not theirs. They thought the womb wandered through the body, that a woman could absorb a man's essence like a sponge, that menstrual blood was unclean and could cause curses if misused. One 13th century medical text claimed that conception wouldn't happen unless the woman climaxed at the same time as the man. Talk about unrealistic expectations. Your husband might believe that pain is normal, that your tears mean you're doing it right, that resistance is part of the process. These weren't exceptions. These were the rule. And let's talk about hymens, shall we? That little bit of misunderstood tissue became the litmus test for a woman's purity. If you bled, you were a virgin. If you didn't, suspicions stirred. But guess what? Hymens don't work like that. Some women don't bleed. Others tear long before their wedding night from horseback riding, from dancing, from climbing trees, even from simple movement. Historians still argue whether medieval people knew this. Some evidence suggests they did and ignored it, because blood wasn't about biology. It was about proof. So women got creative. Some rubbed chicken blood on sheets. Others pricked a finger. A few desperate souls even used animal bladders filled with red wine. Yes, that's a real recorded trick. Virginity in the Middle Ages was theater. And if you didn't know your lines, the consequences were brutal. You shift slightly, and the mattress creaks. The room feels like it's pressing down on your ribs. And what if your body simply can't? Some girls were too young. Their bones hadn't finished growing. Their hips were narrow. Their muscles weak. The act itself could cause permanent damage. There are quiet, grim entries in coroner reports of the era of girls who died from wounds sustained in bed. No one mourned them as victims. They were just unfortunate. You reach for the edge of the sheet, fingers trembling. Your husband's breath is steady, maybe even gentle, but you're a continent apart. Because there's no safe word, no option to say, wait. No guidebook that says, this is how you know you're ready. Instead, there's only that terrible phrase, it's what's expected. It echoes in your mind like a drum. So you lie still. You don't speak. You try not to cry. And in the morning, no one will ask how you feel. They'll only ask if it happened. Because for them, the wedding night is a success only if it changes you. You wake up to the soft creak of a door. Morning light slices through the wooden shutters. Dust drifts in the beam like tiny falling stars. You blink slowly, your body sore, your thoughts tangled in a haze of fatigue and disbelief. The door doesn't fully open. It never does. Just enough for someone, maybe a servant girl, maybe your mother-in-law, to slide in a tray of watered wine and a crust of bread. No words. No eye contact, just a quiet shuffle and the smell of rosemary from the hearth. It's done. The bedding, the watching, the expectation. You don't know how you're supposed to feel. There's no guide for this part either. No one warned you about the mix of numbness and guilt. You sit up slowly. The sheet is twisted beneath you. You glimpse it before you can stop yourself. Your breath catches, a faint brown smear where the blood dried. You think, is that enough? Because today isn't about your feelings. It's about evidence. Which brings us to your unexpected third party in this marriage, the church. If medieval marriage was a business transaction, the church was the notary. They blessed it, regulated it, moralized it, and inserted themselves between the bed sheets at every opportunity. Sex, they said, was sacred, but only in the strictest, most uncomfortable sense. Pleasure suspicious. Initiative borderline sinful. Anything other than the missionary position performed silently and without emotion, straight to confession. Right. You were told that your body belonged to your husband, but more accurately, it belonged to God, who lent it out to your spouse under strict, unspoken conditions. One 12th century theologian wrote that marital intimacy should only occur without desire, without joy, and without sin. Sounds like a real party, doesn't it? And it gets better. The church created a calendar of forbidden days. Times when sex was absolutely not allowed under pain of eternal fire. Lent, Advent, major feast days, Sundays, Fridays, the eve of communion. The list went on and on. Do the math, and suddenly there weren't many approved nights left. And if you disobeyed, your husband might have to confess. You'd be blamed. Women were seen as the root of temptation. If your husband desired you too much, you were clearly seducing him, even in marriage, even in duty. Historians still argue whether these teachings were widely followed or simply preached. In noble courts, there's evidence that couples found clever ways to bend the rules. Quiet, affection, coded love poems, even playful gifts passed between bedroom doors. But in most homes, the weight of religious pressure hung like incense in the rafters. It wasn't just sin, it was salvation. If you didn't obey, you might endanger both your souls. If you enjoyed it, you were walking a razor's edge. The very act meant to produce heirs. The one thing you were celebrated for was simultaneously your greatest moral liability. No wonder you dread it. You stare into the wine, swirling it gently. The tart smell hits your nose. You haven't spoken since last night. Your husband is up now, dressing silently. He doesn't say much either. Maybe that's a mercy. Or maybe it's just another expectation that married people don't talk. Later today, someone will ask how it went. Not directly, of course. There will be polite hints. Did you sleep well? Any news was the chamber warm enough? You'll smile. Say nothing. Pretend. Because the only thing more dangerous than disappointing your husband is disappointing the church. Your body doesn't feel like your own. It feels like something you were supposed to give away and never expect back. One fringe belief in medieval medicine held that if a woman enjoyed herself during intercourse, her child would be stronger, more virtuous. Another said that if you thought sinful thoughts while conceiving your baby could be born deformed. So even thinking the wrong thing could doom your child. No pressure. The church expected obedience. But it didn't teach consent. It taught hierarchy. Men lead, women follow. God smiles. Your role isn't to feel, it's to produce. Sons, ideally. And to endure. And endure you must. Because last night wasn't the only time this will happen. It was only the first. Your husband turns to you briefly, offers a stiff smile. Maybe he thinks he did everything right. Maybe he's just relieved it's over. You return the smile lips tight. You don't know how to say what you feel. Maybe you never will, because there's no room for that here. Not in a world where the church defined your worth by what happened in a bed, and how silently you accepted it. The chamber smells of beeswax and cold ash. It's quiet now, except for the faint clinking of metal from the kitchens below. You sit on the edge of the bed, stiff and still, and wonder if your body will ever feel like yours again. It's not that anyone ever taught you what would happen on your wedding night. They didn't. They handed you over like a jug of wine, nodded, and closed the door. But even before that, long before you'd been fed a stew of rumors, half-truths, and whispered warnings. And now you're discovering the terrifying power of what no one told you. Because frankly, in the Middle Ages, nobody really understood how bodies worked. Not well anyway. Not women's especially. You were likely raised with a jumble of folk beliefs, church doctrine, and medieval science, which mostly came from ancient Greek and Roman texts, misinterpreted and copied over centuries. One popular idea said women's bodies were just inverted versions of men's. Like literally the same parts, just tucked inwards. Romantic rite. You were also told that female desire was both dangerously powerful and morally corrupting, but that you wouldn't be able to conceive without it. So if you didn't enjoy it, any future infertility was your fault. But if you did enjoy it, that made you suspect. There was no safe zone. As for your hymen, well, medieval thinkers didn't agree on that either. Some believed it was a sign of virtue, a seal that must be broken to prove virginity. Others thought it didn't exist at all, that bleeding was the product of violent passion or even divine judgment, fun. Historians still debate whether most medieval women expected to bleed on their wedding night. Some sources suggest it was a near obsession, especially among noble families. White sheets were often inspected, held up to a room of relatives, even paraded through the streets in some towns. If there was no blood, suspicion, accusation, in some cases annulment. But here's the kicker, a surprising number of women didn't bleed their first time. Maybe the hymen wasn't torn. Maybe it never existed. Maybe it tore years earlier from riding a horse, climbing a tree, dancing too hard. It didn't matter. If there was no visible proof, people assumed the worst. That led to all sorts of creative problem solving. One fringe remedy involved pricking your finger and smearing the bed linen with your own blood. Another tip shared among servants and desperate young brides involved slipping a boiled cloth soaked in sheep's blood between your thighs right before the deed. One 14th century manual even suggested making a tiny incision near the opening so that pain and blood will seem natural. Let that one sink in. And if things went too wrong, say if you fainted, bled too heavily, or couldn't walk the next day, well, that could stir gossip too. People might say your husband was cruel, or worse, that you were cursed. Demonic possession wasn't off the table. A woman who cried out during intercourse could be accused of being touched by evil. Some thought pleasure opened you to spiritual corruption, so if you screamed, you were wicked. If you didn't bleed, you were a liar. And if you bled too much, you were broken. And yet you were expected to keep doing it, repeatedly, until you produced an heir. By now, your body is starting to ache in places you didn't know could ache. Maybe you notice bruising. Maybe you walk funny. You're not allowed to say any of this aloud. Your job is to smile and serve sweetmeats in the hall later this afternoon, as if nothing happened. You sip thin wine and try not to gag. Another brutal truth, midwives, the closest thing to women's doctors, weren't always allowed to help with first-time injuries. Unless you were seriously bleeding, you were told to rest and pray. If a midwife did examine you, she might use oil or wine as a primitive antiseptic. No stitches, no numbing, just cold fingers and whispered prayers to Saint Margaret. Still, you were luckier than some. Wealthier girls might at least have a clean bed. Peasant girls married young in cold huts, often without privacy. One village priest in 1291 wrote of bedding ceremonies taking place on straw while animals slept in the same room. Talk about an audience. But no matter your class, it all came down to this ignorance, expectation, and silence. You think of all the stories older women muttered when they thought you weren't listening. Wives who went pale whenever their husbands touched their shoulders. Mothers who spoke in half sentences. A girl who never came back from her wedding night and was buried by month's end. You try to forget that one, so you shift under the blanket stiff and sore and pretend that everything's fine. You have to, because if you can't bear a single night, how will you bear a lifetime? The bells ring outside. Mass is starting. You're supposed to go kneel beside your new husband and thank God for your union, and maybe silently pray that tomorrow hurts less. You wake at dawn to a clatter of hooves outside the manor gates, but you don't move. The sheets are cold and scratchy. Your body feels like it doesn't quite belong to you, as if it were loaned out for a task you didn't ask for and weren't prepared to complete. Then you hear the door creak open. Not your husband, thankfully. It's her, your new mother-in-law. She's the kind of woman who enters a room like a tax collector, eyes sharp, hands folded, already disappointed in whatever she's about to see. You try to sit up, wincing slightly, and she gives you the kind of look that says she noticed. Of course she did. In medieval households, especially among the nobility and upper merchant class, the mother-in-law often held serious domestic authority, sometimes more than the husband himself, especially if he was young or away frequently. She controlled the kitchen, the household accounts, the staff, and yes, you. You're now part of her domain. Her first concern, your duties. She wants to know if you're pregnant yet. You've been married less than 12 hours. It's not a joke. In many noble households, older women would keep literal calendars to track the bride's cycles. They'd monitor how often the couple was alone together, whether the wife was gaining weight, and how often she excused herself to the garden to be sick in the morning. And heaven help you if you confided in your servants. Anything you said might reach her ears by supper. She quizzes you gently but firmly. Did the bedding ceremony go as expected? Was there blood? Are you feeling changed? That word again, vague and heavy. She doesn't need answers. She's measuring your reactions like a merchant weighs grain. Historians still argue whether this tight oversight was truly about morality or just a practical obsession with lineage. Either way, you are now the family's investment, and your womb is expected to deliver results. But the worst part isn't the questions, it's the rituals. She escorts you down the stairs to the hearth room, where the housemaids are waiting, with wine, warm bread, and because life has a sense of humor, a small embroidered cloth to commemorate your wedding night. It's a custom in some parts of France and Italy, a decorative towel stitched with the initials of the couple meant to be blessed by evidence of consummation. And you realize something chilling: she's not here to comfort you. She's here to train you. The medieval mother-in-law had a duty to transform the awkward, soft-spoken girl her son married into a functioning adult woman. That meant teaching you how to run a household, yes, but also how to manage your husband, endure his moods, keep your fertility high and your voice low. You're handed a list of household chores you'll be expected to oversee. Linen counts, wine stock, cheese rotation, goose tally. You didn't even know the family had geese. And the midwife sent for discreetly, perhaps under the guise of blessing. The new bride is already expected to inspect your posture, your complexion, your hips. She has childbearing bones, your mother-in-law says aloud. You're not sure if it's a compliment or a verdict. You nod, smile, try not to weep. She then shifts tone. Quiet, conspiratorial. There are tips she offers in whispers, as though sharing secrets passed down from Eve herself. Use chamomile in your bath to ease cramping. Don't eat garlic on days of the moon's waxing. Let your husband believe he's leading in the bedroom even when he's not. And this one, she emphasizes, never anger him before bed. You realize she's not just preparing you for your role as wife. She's preparing you for survival. Because sometimes she mentions when he drinks too much, or if he comes home from market sour. No names, no details. Just knowing glances and quick nods from the housekeeper. Everyone understands the game. Everyone's playing it. And you're expected to smile through it. The funny thing is, she wasn't always this sharp-edged. She had a mother-in-law once, too. She was once the frightened girl being handed a broom and 1,000 unwritten rules. But over the years, she carved herself into this hardened shell of authority, because that's what the world demanded of her. And now she's shaping you, not kindly, but perhaps out of love in her own impossible way. At dusk, she brings you to the chapel for evening prayers. Not for your soul, no, that's between you and God, but for your uterus. You kneel at the altar of Saint Anne, Mother of Mary, patron of mothers and childbearing women. The candles flicker. You pray, not for joy or even for love. You pray that this gets easier. You don't remember when the shift happened, when that moment of trembling anxiety morphed into something more mechanical. One morning you're waking up wondering what fresh discomfort the day will bring, and the next you're counting eggs, checking for weevils in the flour, and reminding the cook not to burn the leeks again. Your days blur into one another like soft brushstrokes, hushed prayers, mended linens, and the quiet weight of expectation pressing against your every movement. But when the sun goes down, you're no longer a housekeeper or a daughter-in-law. You become something else, a function. You're there to produce heirs. Medieval marriage wasn't about romance. It was an economic and dynastic contract. The expectation of sexual access was baked in from the start, and it wasn't about mutual pleasure. In fact, it wasn't even about you at all. Sex was a duty like spinning thread or making cheese, but more serious, more scrutinized, and infinitely more dangerous. Your husband expects you to be available, not necessarily willing just to present. A warm, quiet body under the covers. If he's kind, maybe he waits until the candles are out. If not, well, it doesn't matter. And here's the kicker. It's not just your husband who's tracking things. Your mother-in-law watches your appetite. The servants exchange glances when you excuse yourself from meals. The village midwife drops by suspiciously often. Everyone is waiting, watching for signs that you've done your job. What job exactly? Producing sons. The church made it crystal clear sex in marriage was acceptable, even holy, but only when it was open to procreation. Enjoying it too much. Sinful. Avoiding it altogether, also sinful. And if you failed to conceive after a year or so, people wouldn't blame your husband. They'd blame you. The town gossip mill would start turning. Were you cursed? Secretly barren, harboring unconfessed sins? Had you angered a saint, or worse, had you bewitched your husband? Historians still argue whether medieval women had more sexual agency than we give them credit for. Some records hint at clever wives leveraging affection, or even feigning illness to control the rhythm of their nights. But more often than not, the reality was bleak. Sex was not for your pleasure, it was your obligation. and it was tracked like a ledger, literally. Noble households kept books of accounts that noted everything from grain deliveries to conjugal visits. In some cases, confessions to priests included confessions of frequency, positioning, even level of enjoyment. Spoiler, if you enjoyed it too much, that was suspect. Possibly demonic. Totally awkward. Even stranger sex during daylight was frowned upon. The preferred hour was just before midnight, less likely to attract attention from curious spirits and nosy in-laws. And don't even think about Wednesdays or Fridays. Too holy. Sundays forbidden. The church calendar carved up the year with so many no-go dates that some scholars estimate over 100 days annually were off limits for marital relations. Still, your husband keeps count. If you seem reluctant too many nights in a row, he might consult a local priest who would gently remind you that withholding intimacy was grounds for ecclesiastical complaint. In plain terms, refusing your husband could lead to public shame, spiritual rebuke, or even annulment. And if he was powerful, probably worse. You try to cope. You learn to read his moods. When he slams the door too hard, you know not to speak. When he hums under his breath after dinner, it might be safe to ask for a rest day. You bribe the cook to serve wine at just the right strength enough to make him drowsy, not angry. You feign fatigue. You fake sleep. Sometimes you even fake interest. But the truth lingers, this isn't a romance. It's a responsibility. One night, as the fire crackles and the moonlight softens the stone walls of your chamber, he turns to you and asks genuinely if you're happy. You smile because it's the only safe answer, and maybe for a moment he believes you. Maybe you almost believe it too. But deep down you know that each night is a ritual, not of intimacy, but of necessity, not of love, but of lineage. And when the act is done, when he turns away and begins to snore, you lie there wide-eyed, counting the days until your next cycle or lack thereof. Because the real test of your worth isn't how you feel, it's whether or not you're with child. You wake up, dizzy stomach turning, and even before you swing your feet onto the rush-covered floor, you know. The chill of early morning air bites at your skin, but it's nothing compared to the cold creeping up your spine. No blood, not this time. You sit still for a long moment, palms pressed flat against your abdomen. Is it hope? Is it dread? You're not sure anymore. Pregnancy, in theory, is the entire reason you were married off. It's the holy grail of noble womanhood, the goal whispered by midwives and demanded by mothers-in-law. But the truth is, you're terrified. Not because you don't want children. You've known your worth would one day be measured in sons. No, the fear runs deeper than that. Because pregnancy is just the beginning. Giving birth, that's where women like you disappear. 1 in 3 women died during or soon after childbirth in some medieval regions, especially among the noble classes, where expectations for multiple births and tight spacing between them were relentless. Each pregnancy was a gamble, a real one. Not the modern sort where statistics are just numbers. This was a literal roll of the dice with your life. Even the most pious women, even queens, sometimes begged for the church's forgiveness ahead of labor, just in case they didn't survive long enough to confess afterward. You've seen it happen. You watched your cousin Emma, pale and hollow-eyed at 16, scream herself hoarse before bleeding out under layers of scratchy linen. The baby didn't make it either. You remember the way her mother didn't cry, just clenched her jaw, nodded grimly, and asked the priest to fetch the death oil. So yes, you're scared, and no one really tells you what to do about it. Herbs, Maybe. There's pennyroyal, which smells like mint and might bring on a period, but too much could kill you outright. There's tansy mugwort, or rue bitter, and dangerous in the wrong dose. You've seen servant girls whisper to one another, passing sprigs of dried leaves in the laundry room, pretending it's for soup. But you're not a maid. You're a wife now, and avoiding pregnancy would be seen not just as subversive, but as sinful. The church was clear on that. Every marital act had to remain open to life. Even talking about birth control could brand you as unnatural, or worse, a heretic. Yet folk remedies abounded quietly, passed from woman to woman. A bit of wool soaked in wine, strange charms stitched into pouches. Even crocodile dung, yes, dung, was mentioned in foreign manuscripts as a magical preventative, though let's hope that was more theory than practice. Historians still argue whether these methods worked or whether they were just hopeful acts of desperation, little more than ritualistic superstition. But what's undeniable is that women tried, because they had to, and now it's your turn. You visit the midwife under the pretense of seeking advice for female complaints. She presses a hand to your belly and squints, offers you a drink that smells like dirt and cloves, tells you gently that time will tell, but in her experience, a belly that still turns at bacon means it's likely begun. You nearly cry on the spot. The worst part isn't even the pregnancy, it's the waiting. Days stretch like treacle. You overanalyze every cramp, every hiccup of nausea, every breathless climb up the stairs. You try to act normal. You pray in chapel with folded hands and frozen lips, even as your heart pounds like a smith's hammer, and you're not alone. Every noble woman you know walks this tightrope, balancing a desperate need to succeed with an equally desperate need to survive. You overheard a lady once joke that a womb is just a coin purse open too long and everything valuable falls out. You laughed politely, but it wasn't funny. Your husband starts watching you more closely. So does your mother-in-law. They note what you eat, how much you sleep when you excuse yourself from Mass. Soon you're told to stop climbing stairs and lifting anything heavier than a book. The physician is summoned. He gives you a talisman and a warning. No salt, no eels, and stay away from thunderstorms. You don't ask why. You just nod and accept the latest in a long line of arbitrary rules meant to protect a fragile life that now lives inside you. A life you haven't met. A life that could end yours. You begin preparing. The nursery is arranged, though you're forbidden to touch anything directly. Bad luck, they say. You're gifted a tiny linen cap embroidered with your house's crest. It's beautiful. It terrifies you. At night, you dream of deep water, of falling, of muffled cries. Sometimes you hear the voices of women, long-gone cousins, aunts, faceless ancestors who also sat on this edge between creation and destruction. They don't say much, just sit with you in the dark, and that's almost worse than words. Because deep down, you know what they know. This isn't a blessing yet. It's a sentence one you'll carry to term one breath at a time. The sun hasn't risen yet, but you're already dressed, quiet, careful, wrapped in a plain shift, so no one hears you slip down the servants' stairs. The manor is still asleep, but in the kitchen the hearth is already smoldering, and a figure moves through the smoke like a ghost. It's Hilda, the undermaid. She's maybe 19 older than you, oddly enough, and has served in this house since she could walk. Her hands are always moving, chopping, mending, brushing soot off pewter, wringing secrets from silence. And you're here because she knows everything. You perch on the edge of the stool as she drops 2 cracked eggs into a bowl. She doesn't look up, just mutters, "You're late." Late. You feel your cheeks flush. How does she know? Does she mean it like that? No. Just your regular visit. Hilda knows what's happening even before you do. That's her power. And frankly, you'd be lost without it. Because as much as noble women are expected to run a household, no one ever actually tells you how. Not the real stuff. Not how to keep milk from curdling during a heat wave. Not how to signal to a maid that your husband's left bruises on your wrist without saying a word. And certainly not how to survive your first year of marriage. But the servant girls do. They're your unofficial tutors, especially when it comes to the unspoken curriculum of womanhood. Things like how to stuff a cloth under your chemise on the second day of your bleeding to avoid spotting your best kirtle. Or how to feign a headache in a way that actually convinces your husband to leave you alone. That trick with the rosemary boiled in wine to settle the womb that came from Hilda. So did the advice to bite your lip during the bedding ceremony so you're too distracted to cry. Today she offers you something new, a small pouch stitched with red thread tied with waxed string. She doesn't say what's inside, just presses it into your palm and mutters, "Sleep with it under your pillow." No questions. It smells like dried flowers and old leather. You nod grateful. Historians still argue whether such tokens were true folk remedies, psychological comfort, or outright superstitions, but that debate misses the point. These weren't just charms, they were lifelines. Because when the official system's church law family failed to protect women, other women filled the gap. You've overheard older maids whispering in corners, teaching younger ones how to mix honey and vinegar for infections or where to get real help if a pregnancy wasn't meant to happen. You once caught sight of an herb bundle tucked under a mattress wrapped in lambskin. It was gone the next day. Of course, if you ever got caught using this knowledge, punishment could be brutal. It was one thing for maids to pass recipes for headache drafts. It was another for them to know how to fake a virginity test or discreetly bury a stillborn child in the orchard's far end. That crossed into witchcraft as the church saw it. But the reality, it was often just survival. One maid in your cousin's household, Tilda, was caught brewing something in the scullery. Claimed it was for cramps. The steward didn't believe her. She vanished within the week. No explanation, just gone. You still remember your cousin's pale face when she whispered, "She was trying to help me." You don't ask questions like that anymore. Not out loud, but you do learn. You listen. You watch. You take mental notes. Because these women, they know things books won't tell you. They see what goes on after the feast ends and the chamber door shuts. They know which nobleman can't stand the smell of garlic and which lady sleeps with a knife under her bolster. And they remember. They remember when you were a wide-eyed bride too nervous to eat on your wedding night. They remember what color your shift was the first time you bled through it. They remember how you flinched the first time your husband raised his voice and how you didn't flinch the third time. They don't judge you, not really, because they've seen worse. Some of them have lived worse. And even if they tease or scold, even if they roll their eyes at your panic or insist you harden up, they're still your quiet allies, your soft net. Tonight, as you climb back upstairs with the pouch tucked into your sleeve, you feel a strange peace. Not safety exactly. That's still far away. But preparedness. You don't know what your husband will want tonight, or whether the midwife will say the baby is real this time. You don't even know what your mother-in-law will say about the soup being too salty. But you do know that Hilda showed you how to lace your stays faster. That Marta whispered which teas are best for swelling. That Bess left a clean cloth folded under your pillow. And that maybe will make all the difference. You lie back hands folded over your stomach, staring at the canopy above your bed. Somewhere below, the dogs bark once, then fall quiet. The house creaks. A log shifts in the hearth with a sigh. You're trying to sleep, but your thoughts are louder than the wind outside. Because tomorrow morning the sheets will be inspected, and you don't know if you'll pass. The obsession with virginity. It's not new. You grew up knowing your value rested somewhere between your dowry and your purity. But no one really explained how you're supposed to prove it, or what happens if you don't. Here's the cheerful truth no one ever printed in a prayer book. In many medieval households, noble or not, it wasn't enough to marry. You had to demonstrate the consummation, which meant bleeding, and not metaphorically. Your husband is expected to deflower you. Yes, that exact word. And the next morning, the sheets must show evidence. Sometimes the linens were even displayed to family, to witnesses, to the entire village if the mood struck. That wasn't love. That was a public exam in humiliation. And the thing no one admits, not every woman bled. Some never did. Some did too much. Some, especially those married off in childhood, had already been injured by horseback riding infections, or in tragic cases worse. Historians still argue whether the blood ritual custom was universal or more regional. Some claim it was mostly an elite or Eastern tradition. Others insist it cropped up across peasant villages too. But wherever it happened, it came with immense pressure. So women got creative. The Virginity Scam, they called it though. Really, it was resourceful survival. One method: smearing animal blood, chicken, lamb, whatever was handy on the sheets. The trick was to hide it in the mattress beforehand, then apply discreetly after the deed. Another involved pricking your thigh or palm with a needle under the covers. Risky, of course, but less risky than being accused of impurity. That charge could ruin you. You've heard darker stories. A young bride in the next village, unable to bleed, was accused of being a secret harlot. Her husband beat her. The priest banished her. No one asked if maybe she just didn't bleed. And then there's the boiled linen. Yes, boiled. You soak a square of it in herbs and red wine, dry it carefully. Then press it against your body to stain with heat and moisture. If done right, it fools even the keenest mother-in-law. Did you ever think you'd be memorizing these techniques like battle plans? It feels absurd, doesn't it? To sit in your chamber the night before your wedding, wondering whether you should hide a flask of goat's blood in your sleeve. But here you are, praying that whatever happens, you won't be one of the failed brides. Your husband won't be tested, of course. No one checks his sheets. No one demands proof that he was chaste. In fact, if he's too gentle, or if the sheets are too clean, you might be blamed for tempting him into weakness. That's the logic. Twisted, yes, but deeply entrenched. And remember Hilda's pouch from last night. It's tucked under your pillow now. You finally opened it. Dried mint, crushed rose petals, and a tiny scrap of parchment with a protection prayer. It smells like summer. You don't believe in magic, not really, but it helps. There's an old tale she told you once. A merchant's daughter, clever and quiet, knew she wouldn't bleed on her wedding night. She pretended to faint during the feast, had her maid sneak in bloodied cloths from a butcher, and planted them beneath the bedding. The morning after, her husband declared her the purest bride he'd ever seen. Decades later, she ruled the estate. Sometimes survival is a performance. You roll over facing the fire. Your stomach tightens. The wedding is tomorrow. Your night will come. And by dawn, someone, maybe your mother, maybe the steward's wife, will pull back those sheets like they're flipping a ledger. You're not sure what they'll find, but you do know what they want. You think of Marta, who told you to keep a drop of beetroot juice under your fingernail just in case. Of Lady Amelise, who whispered that purity is as much politics as flesh. Of the midwife who taught you very quietly how to scream just right. You close your eyes. You're not a liar. You're not a fraud. You're just trying to stay alive. And in a world that demands blood to believe you're worth loving, maybe a little cleverness is exactly what you need. The scream echoes down the hallway before anyone realizes whose voice it was. Yours. You didn't mean to make a scene. But when the pain struck sharp, fast, unrelenting, it escaped your lips before you could stop it. And now someone's knocking on the chamber door. Your husband curses under his breath. You both freeze. Things went wrong. Very wrong. Wedding nights don't come with instruction manuals. And in your case, the education was barely whispered. Just vague warnings, duties, and a few ridiculous metaphors involving flowers or keys. So what happened tonight? No one told you how much it might hurt, or how angry he might become when you flinched, or how easily panic could fill a candlelit room with silence thicker than the tapestries on the wall. Your husband, to his credit, tried to stay calm at first. But when things didn't go as expected, when you didn't just relax and let him win the prize everyone said he was owed, he turned colder. You remember his exact words? Why are you being difficult? As if pain were defiance. As if your body not responding like a poem or a prophecy was an insult to him. This wasn't how they said it would be. The stories painted it as sacred, even beautiful something to endure, sure, but also something bonding. Instead, you lie here now, covered in sweat and shame with bruises blooming along your ribs, praying no one calls it your fault, because they will if it comes to that. And here's the thing, medieval law almost always sided with men. If a marriage went unconsummated, it could be annulled, but only with proof. If a bride resisted too hard, she could be labeled barren, frigid, even mad. If she bled too much or passed out, that was weakness. If she cried afterward, that was drama. Historians still argue whether most women actually feared their wedding night, or if only a vocal minority did, but personal accounts, rare though they are, suggest deep anxiety was common. Not just because of physical pain, but because of the social danger of getting it wrong. You remember the tale of Lady Jeanette, how her husband flew into a rage on their wedding night, then declared the marriage invalid. Claimed she was unnatural. Her dowry was confiscated, her family disgraced. She spent the rest of her life in a convent under silent vows she never chose. And it wasn't just the elite. In village courts, there were cases, plenty of them, of men accusing their wives of witchcraft because the first night didn't go well. Women were blamed for impotence, for infertility, for weak moral essence. One poor girl was whipped publicly when she didn't bleed. The midwife who vouched for her was dismissed as a fraud. So many things could go wrong. Maybe your husband expected you to be experienced. Maybe he didn't care whether you were terrified. Maybe he drank too much mead and thought pain meant progress. Or maybe, just maybe, he panicked too. Because no one trains young men for tenderness. They're taught about conquest, ownership, rights. They're warned that a cold wife is a sign of disobedience, not trauma. That if a woman flinches, she must be corrected. That the marriage bed is a battlefield and they are the rightful victor. So he reached for you like a knight charging into war. And you're left wounded, not visibly. Not in a way anyone will treat with herbs or poultices, but in the ache you now carry in your belly, your chest, your trust. It's the kind of hurt that lingers in silences and hesitations. The kind you don't get to name out loud. You turn on your side, pulling the furs around you tighter, trying not to cry again. You remember how the girls used to whisper in the laundry room. How one of them, Ava, said she packed a stone under her mattress just in case things got bad. No one asked what the stone was for. No one had to. And now here you are understanding things you hoped you'd never need to know. The candle has burned down to a stub. Outside, a rooster crows early, confused. The sheets beneath you are rumpled but clean. No red stains, no triumphant husband, no proud in-laws peeking in. Just a broken night and a new, heavier silence. You try to think of something good, a safe thought. You picture the apple tree in your family's courtyard, where you used to sit with a crust of bread and a book of saints' tales. You remember the breeze, the bees, the shadow of your own hand waving across the page. You remember how the sun felt warm and the world briefly felt full of choice. You tell yourself it will get better, that tonight was the worst of it, that maybe you and he will learn to speak to understand, that perhaps though you're not betting on it, he'll apologize in some quiet, awkward way. But deep down, you know what this night means. It's the start of your new life. And already something precious has been taken from you, not your virtue, not your pride, but the ability to trust that a closed door means safety. You close your eyes and whisper something only you can hear. Maybe a prayer, maybe a promise, but definitely not goodbye. The door creaks open with the morning light, but you don't stir, not at first. You're lying there stiff, half-curled beneath the covers, not quite asleep, not really awake, just existing in the thick cotton fog of what came before. The chamber smells of tallow candles, dried lavender, and something else less pleasant. Sweat. Fear. A trace of iron. You try not to breathe too deeply. There's a rustling sound, footsteps on rushes, the rustle of skirts. Someone, probably a servant girl, has come to clear away the chamber pot and check the sheets. That last part matters more than you'd like. In some households, the soiled linens are hung outside as a banner of honor. In others, they're privately inspected by older women with pursed lips and far too much interest in your body. In your case, they'll find nothing, no proof of anything, no victory banner, no scandal either. Just silence. It would be a small relief if it weren't for the other truth sinking in. This is forever. You're a wife now. The words sound oddly hollow in your head, like a bell that rings but never echoes. Wife. As if that title gives you power. As if it grants you belonging. But in truth, it mostly grants you expectations. You are expected to serve, to conceive, to endure. You're expected to smile at feasts, kiss cheeks at funerals, and never speak too boldly. You remember something one of your older cousins told you? Half joking. A husband is like weather. You can't change him, but you'd better dress accordingly. You didn't understand her then. You do now. Today, everything begins in earnest. You'll be led to the kitchens for breakfast, where the older women will eye you carefully, some with pity, some with smugness. They'll offer you hot broth, sweetened bread, and advice you didn't ask for. Maybe one will press a dried herb sachet into your hand, whispering something about healing or conception. None of it will feel real, but you'll nod. You'll smile. You'll do what you've been trained to do, keep moving. Your husband may come find you later. Maybe he'll act like nothing happened. Maybe he'll try again. Maybe, though it's rare, he'll even apologize awkwardly like a boy caught breaking something he didn't mean to. And maybe in time you'll both learn how to live in this strange space called marriage. But not yet. Right now you're just surviving. You're adjusting to the weight of your new name, your new status, your new cage. You're already counting your calendar, whispering silent prayers that your cycle doesn't come late or too early. You know the stakes. You've heard the tales of brides who couldn't produce, who were replaced quietly or publicly shamed. You also know about the ones who conceived too quickly, bled too hard, and never woke again. Historians still debate how widespread these fears truly were. Some say most women simply accepted their fate with stoic resolve. Others argue that beneath every composed face was a mind desperately calculating ways to survive, to influence, to disappear inside the role without vanishing altogether. You believe the second camp, because now you're one of them. In the days ahead, you'll learn how to navigate your husband's moods. When to press him, when to flatter, when to ask for nothing. You'll learn what chores you're expected to manage and which servants secretly resent you. You'll map the unspoken rules of your new house, who watches, who listens, who gossips, and who guards secrets like gold. You'll learn to read the weather of your own home, and somewhere in that learning, you might write them, not happiness, not yet, but rhythm. A pattern you can move inside like a dance that requires just enough thought to keep your mind from drowning. Maybe eventually, there will be moments of light, a warm fire, a clever maid, a garden where you can sit with a book and pretend just for a moment that this life belongs to you. And if you're lucky, truly lucky, you and your husband will grow into some form of uneasy peace. He'll stop trying to conquer you and start trying to understand you. You'll stop flinching at his voice. And perhaps on a day far from this one, you'll find yourselves laughing over wine, sharing a look that isn't filled with fear or obligation. Or maybe you won't, but you'll survive either way, because you always have. You breathe in slowly now. The air smells a little fresher. Someone has thrown open a window, and the summer wind is rolling in like a gentle tide. Your eyes flutter closed just for a moment as you try to let the fear slip out with the breeze. The worst is over. The rest is a long, quiet war fought in silks and silence and careful words and controlled expressions. A war of endurance. But tonight is behind you, and that's something. Wind down 300 words, so now you're lying still, the morning sun soft against your cheek, no longer the girl you were yesterday. The weight of everything hasn't vanished, but it's shifted, softened, tucked somewhere quieter for now. It's not peace, but it's a pause, and that's enough. In the hallway, you can just barely make out the clatter of wooden shoes on stone, the faint echo of someone humming a folk tune you used to love. It's familiar, safe, like being rocked on a little boat in a calm harbor, even if you know a storm might be brewing past the horizon. Your hands find each other under the sheets. The linen is cool, rough in spots, but it's real, tangible. So is the feeling creeping into your chest, this odd mixture of fear, strength, and clarity. You survived something sacred and cruel and confusing all at once. And while you may never understand it fully, you are still here. Still you. You can almost hear the whisper of distant trees outside the manor walls. A breeze flows in with a hush like nature exhaling for you. No more questions, no more performances, just stillness, a space to breathe. And now finally you let your eyes close again. You don't need to know what happens next. Not right this moment. Not as the wind brushes your cheek and the sky glows pale gold. Right now you let yourself rest, because you've earned that this quiet, this pause, this one soft beginning at the edge of something vast and unknown. You're safe for now, and maybe, just maybe, you'll be more than what they expected of you. Sweet dreams. End of script. Sweet dreams.